World-renowned human performance expert, executive coach, best-selling author.
And I want to congratulate Ron Kardashian.
Over 12,000 hours of one-on-one coaching and mentorship.
He's a health and cognitive expert.
Known as a spiritual confidant to respected industry leaders. CEO of 3 companies.
Coach and minister Ron Kardashian.
Good friend, Coach Ron Kardashian.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Tim Boyko here with Always Winning in Leadership. And we are talking about what the world's most elite leaders have in common. Here to take it away, Coach Ron Kardashian.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everybody. We're going to dive right into it today. You know, there's a secret mystery that a lot of people don't understand about highly successful leaders. And we're going to go live on Instagram simultaneously as I'm talking here. So I'm just going to greet them. But I want you to get out a notepad and paper and get ready to take some notes on this. Coach Ron Kardashian coming to you live. Thanks for my Instagram followers. Want to give you some deep discussions on some mysteries, areas where leaders have in common that they're using behind the scenes that you may not know about. So take out a pen and paper. Let's get right into it. So I have a couple cameras here going on, guys, but I am 100% focused on all of you. There's a pattern. Patterns create rhythms. If you think about it in your day-to-day life, the process of the brain is it gets used to patterns. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you wake up, you go down to hit the espresso machine or the coffee machine, you wake up, you walk right into the closet. And disrupting these patterns is the difference between fast success and sustained leadership. Because it's not just about succeeding, it's about sustaining. Quick story. Had a client years ago, this is 20 years ago, sold their company for $40 billion. That's with a B. And to the point is it wasn't just about acquiring the wealth. The real battle was yet ahead of them. How can you sustain what you have? Someone might say, Ron, how could you ever run out of $40 billion? You'd be surprised. Of course, after taxes and the whole thing was done, maybe they came out with 8 billion, 10 billion, 20, whatever it was. Regardless, I received a phone call about 18 weeks after the merger, and there was a major economical crash. And the wife was completely disturbed about their investments because Bear Stearns was crashing at the time. And she didn't know if the money was actually going to completely dry up. Get the point? Sustained wealth, not just accruing wealth. And why some leaders burn brighter and then disappear? Because the pressure of these things, creates this kind of this psychological inferiority complex, while others endure for decades. So some things for you to think about. So I want to introduce my thesis on endurance as biological, relational, and neurological. Fancy way of saying this is affecting your body. Enduring leadership isn't about willpower. It's about regulation. Make no mistake about it. The regulated person will accelerate well after the wealthy person makes all their money. Okay. So let's talk about what that means. How authority increases your cortisol load is something that I've been talking more about because people are suffering from decision fatigue. In other words, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this? And research on isolation and executive stress, there was these longitudinal findings from Harvard University that actually showed prefrontal cortex, remember the decision maker of the brain. When you're talking about going to college, when you're talking about getting another job, when you're talking about buying a home, that part of the brain suppresses under chronic strain. And that's why isolation at the top becomes a cognitive liability. So remember, we're talking about the secrets of the great here, but I have to frame this right so you understand the concept of sustaining your success without burning out. I'm going to show you what they did because I've coached many, many leaders, and this process is a game changer for them, and it can be a game changer for you. The higher you rise, the more your nervous system is under siege. Think of it as like a pyramid. I remember Oprah saying, it's lonely at the top, there's less oxygen. And it's true physically. The higher you climb on the buildings, the higher you, maybe not a building, Think a mountain. I have some executives who've hired Kilimanjaro, right? Some of the biggest mountains in the world. Or if you climbed Half Dome in Yosemite, sometimes you need a little oxygen mask. And this is what happens the more successful you become. So setting up a baseline infrastructure underneath these foundations is a game changer. All right. Now let me spend about 5 to 6, 7 minutes on this piece, because this is, if you miss this, you miss the whole thing. Epigenetics. You hear me talk about it all the time. Epi means beyond, genetics. You're going to get blue in the face. Coach, you always mention this. All right. Well, frame it. Leadership is rewriting your cells. So there's an understanding of how my behavior or the people in your life, you could have a mentor, a pastor, a coach, a therapist, their behaviors are actually rewiring your genes. It's called gene expression. And it's rewiring how you process stress. So chronic activation creates inflammation in the body, and that has long-term impact. So I want you to get this understanding. What do successful people have in common that everybody is missing out on? And a lot of executives, they won't tell you about this. They will not share with you what I'm about to share with you at the end of this video. Studies from the institutions like Stanford University on stress and biological adaptation, they have proven chronic stress creates inflammation, and that has long-term impact. So how your environment, epigenetics, is programmed two ways: who you're listening to and the environments that you hang out in. You can't change it. This is why the inner city stays the inner city. Believe it's true. I grew up in some parts of the projects where, I mean, I was raised middle class, but I went to the projects. My heart always went down to, you know, people that needed more support. I found great joy in hanging out with people that, didn't weren't privileged like I was growing up. I was privileged. I grew up in upper middle class, and I didn't think it was fair. That's why I'm probably a therapist today. But now that I'm looking back as a neural performance coach and practicing and studying the brain, how it works, it's like it was a trap for some of my boys back in the day, because it kept them in these loops, and it was really hard for them to get out. This is why, we give such credit to people who've come out from nothing. This is a serious thing, and it's powerful. And there's a hack on how to develop this pretty fast, and highly successful people know how to do this. The environment and the relationship, your environment and the programming, the relationship with the friend, the partner, the lover, the therapist, the pastor, creates relational safety, and it affects your resilience markers. Make no mistake about it. Just a quick way to say this: leadership isn't just shaping markets, it's shaping your genes. And once you get this down, you're off to a whole other level of development. All right? So, what happens if you isolate? And as we get to the top, as most of these leaders done, there's heavy room, there's heavy rooms, I should say, that they enter into that become very lonely. I know, I've experienced this. Authority distorts feedback loops. And so what happens is you think that you get into this space where you know everything. Knowledge puffs up, make no mistake about it. Highly smart people, it takes a certain level of disposition to have the right voices in your life. And so overconfidence bias actually helps with cognitive narrowing. If you want to cognitively narrow, be overconfident. I mean, these are proven things. This is why the Bible says pride comes before a fall, humility precedes honor. Very powerful. Pride comes before destruction. Humility in any capacity, which is not weakness, elevates. It does something to the brain. There's some historical examples of leaders who fell during, echo chambers, man. We know this. We see this pressure. You look in pro sports, they get to the Super Bowl, all of a sudden someone wigs out. Too much alcohol, too much drugs. Boom, massive car accident, they're out. The headlines are filled with this. Look at Epstein: power, control, addiction, sexual manipulation, coercion. I mean, these are behavioral traits that are the outcome on a micro level of people that we're dealing with every day. And the biology of not being known. How about that? How about being ultra successful, but no one knows you? There's a one liner that I never want you to forget. Power without containment becomes distortion. Power without containment. And so here is the one relationship that protects the whole thing. When these individuals have what I call a confidant or an executive advisor, or not a board member, right? Not a publicist. We're talking about a confidant, one who is intimately acquainted with them. You think about every major crown in world history has had a confidant. It is the secret element of neuroscience and the fullness of co-regulation. And it's been a game changer. There are many people I've coached that you've seen on the news that will never tell you they had a confidant. Because in the early 90s and the early 2000s, this was a very highly disciplined, high level elite service. And people just wanted to be known for how well that they were performing. That's great. Leaders now, it's kind of like the personal trainer surge. They want you to know I've got a confidant. There is somebody that I am bouncing things off of that know intimate things, not just about the business, their personal life. Why? Biology. Things we work with them like vagal tone, emotional containment, clarity restoration. Why the most enduring leaders secure a private truth telling relationship? Because it distinguishes them. It distinguishes them, and neurologically and biologically, they begin performing at levels the brain never even thought possible. I love this biblical proverb. It says, two is better than one, period. Is two better? 100%, always. Also, another proverb, 15:22, plans succeed or fail for a lack of counsel. It's a game changer, ladies and gentlemen. So, when you've got mentors in your life, I told one guy the other day, he's in his 30s, very successful, already has done several $1,000,000. I said, imagine what you can do by 52. He said, man, I can't imagine. I said, I'm 20 years into your future. I can save you a lot of pain. A wise man learns from another man's mistakes. A fool learns from themselves. This is why all some of the greatest CEOs and leaders, you could be ecumenical, you can be political, mentorship. We're seeing it now on the national platform. Unseasoned, unregulated men who will not listen to anybody except themselves. It's a form of narcissism. Just Google that word because you don't have to be a full blown narcissist to have narcissistic traits. But these behavioral traits will come out and eventually they'll knock you out biologically and physically. Distinguished advisors versus a confidant. What's the difference? Without revealing my operational secrets here, right? An advisor protects performance, the right relationship protects the person. Big difference because it's not just performance, although performance is the outcome of the person, right? I did this with pro athletes. Man, I knew guys that were drafted. I knew guys that were third and fourth string. They still got into the NFL, which is the probability, the statistics are astronomical. NBA is even more. Is I think there's only 1,700 athletes worldwide or something like that. I can't remember that exact number. I was working with an NBA guy, never even heard of him, but he made it to the NBA. Why didn't he perform the best? Because something in his person was still offline. It could be self confidence, it could be emotional dysregulation, it could be internal shame or guilt. You could be a world leader and still feel like you're not worthy to be a leader. And I call it the imposter syndrome, where you'll go out and you'll help everybody else. You may knock down a good deal. You come home and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're just like, I'm not the same person. Why do I feel like I'm not as good as that person I'm looking at inside? Guess who dealt with that? I know how that feels. It's always about the expectation. And until regulation comes, there is no explosion. There is no optimization. Regulation precedes optimization, and the confidant brings it out. Now let me wrap up with this because there's what I call a little quiet divide, right? The widening gap between leaders who build internal architecture and those who don't is the game changer. They build emotional infrastructure, not just big portfolios. If you're only after the money, you've missed the whole mark because money's fleeting. In fact, one of my mentors used to say, having a lot of money, and he's basically a billionaire, he says, having a lot of money just makes you comfortable while you're miserable. And Tim, you know who that guy is. You know, he says it all the time. And this is why endurance must be intentional. So when the advisors are talking, it's for performance. When the confidant is talking, it is for the person. And that person carries the greatest gravity. There's no hype because it's 100% organic you. The leaders shaping the next decade aren't just building strategy, they're protecting the biology behind it. They're protecting their health and wellness. I told one guy who had sold his company for an obscene amount of money. I said, my opening statement was when I came in, because of course they were very arrogant, and I hadn't coached that many fortune companies prior, so I was coming in as a young buck. I said, well, let me start off by asking, do you know where your medulla oblongata is located? And he he looked at me and he said, "What is that?" You know, he's 70 years old. He doesn't know where the medulla is. It is the main spinal stem into your spinal column. You jack that up, it's at the base of the neck. That's why boxing, they do not allow you to box posterior or around the back. We train boxers to hit on point. Another key here, right? Leaders need to hit on point. Anyway, at the base of the medulla is where the vagus nerve attaches. That baby bypasses the spinal column, goes right into the left atrium of the heart. That is what creates emotional stability. And if you're not emotionally regulated, that little nerve can send signals to the left atrium and begin to produce cholesterol that will begin to harden the arteries, even with an organic diet, even with exercise and fitness. Why? Because regulation must precede revelation. And the guys behind the scenes, the women behind the scenes, who have the mastery elegance of the confidant, whispering strategy contained, are operating on a whole other level. So if you are a young person in leadership and you have never explored the pathway of mentorship, whether it's our organization or another one is irrelevant, find somebody that you can trust. Find somebody that you can confide in. And when confiding in someone is optimized at this level, you become one of the most elite leaders in the world in your space. And the trajectory and the outcome of the results that follow are absolutely groundbreaking. Grab my article in LinkedIn coming March 1st. I'm going to be talking about the power of the crown. We don't have a title yet for it. Maybe I'll use this same title, but I'm going to break down the longevity, the strength, the science, the power of belonging. When you've got somebody like me in your life who actually is in his calling and you meet someone else in their calling, man, the neurochemistry and the heart rhythm cadence that comes together begins to beat like an NFL basketball, an NBA basketball team on their rhythm. You'll hear pro athletes say, "How'd you win the championship?" And they'll say, "Man, we were just on a whole other level of rhythm." And it's important because the wrong therapist, via the law of epigenetics, their own internal behaviors can actually change your gene expression. So having the right mentor, having the right confidant, having the right executive counsel in your life is now proven biologically by some of the greatest universities in the world that could actually be a matter of life or death. You know, we've heard it before. You are the sum total of the top 5 people you surround yourself with on a daily basis. And people of influence have to make sure that you're not just under the influence. Be careful who you're under the influence of because it could kill you and take your life. So just some things I want you to think about. I mean, Tim, we can go on and on, but I'm really glad we got this done in about 20 minutes.
This is powerful. I'm gonna start with a follow-up question here
Question.
because, as someone who has sought mentorship all throughout my corporate career,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've learned in my early on mentors is they were just like me, just further advanced, meaning They
Yeah.
really weren't a different mindset. They were the same mindset 30 years into the future, which really
Yeah.
isn't what we want. So my question here is, how do you ensure that the mentor and that you are seeking is actually someone who is different than you so that they actually are molding you into someone different?
Well, the question here for our other audiences is how can you make sure that the person that you're about to engage as a mentor, coach, or therapist is like you or not like you? And I think you got to answer both realms. So one is conscientiousness. If you're a very heartfelt person and you're with a very stoic mentor, that's not going to work. It's a different gene expression. Think about just physiological expressions. Example of this, I met a lady yesterday who's a powerful consultant. Within 30 seconds, I could feel her heart rhythm. Now, people that aren't trained in heart rhythm, just go easy on yourself and think about it as a vibe. You got to be able to vibe people. This is part of business excellence and acumen, from hiring employees to running and facilitating teams. You need to have this internal muscle developed so you don't keep getting duped, scammed, lied to, hurt. I mean, early years of my relationships before I met my wife, I would constantly pick the wrong woman. Why was I doing that? I was the wrong man. So after you get quiet for a little bit, take some time for yourself, go inward. Let that energy, let that heart engage. It's literally the neurons of the heart beginning to fire because you're conscious of them. And then I would ask three questions to this person. Number one, I would say, talk to me about your values and your belief systems. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right, Tim? And they will tell you what they value. If there's hesitation, then they're coming from remuneration, memorization. You want it to come from here. Number one, when I talk about my value system, conscientiousness, high sense of duty, that I want to be someone who always honors their word, not perfection. And guess what? You can't BS this. If you try to BS it, signals will begin to fire and people will pull back. You'll feel it immediately. And watch for that. Watch for the sincerity. The Bible says that the eyes are a gateway to the soul. Look people in the eyes. Number two, I would for surely talk about their own theories, curriculum, and education. Do you have any books written? Who have you helped? Do you have any testimonials? You know, we have over 30, 40 testimonials that people don't like to write about. Again, it's a very private, but some of these people who are, aren't famous, it's really the more famous ones, but are very heartfelt. They haven't just written one-liners, they've written stories, right, Tim? On our
Correct.
LinkedIn profile, go
Absolutely.
to, if you want to check out our stuff, but make sure that they have some referrals. And then lastly, which is really important, is watching how they respond with their overall disposition. Because disposition, if they're real anxious or they kind of brush you off, or arrogance is a big one. Now, our services are premium. We're the Mercedes Benz or the Bentleys of coaches. But in life, quality counts. It's not just quantity; it's quality, and you get what you pay for. So, but for some high end coaches that categorize themselves there, or therapists, or confidants, you better make sure that that disposition lines up with their fee. Composure is the fruit of great kings, great queens. Disposition, gentleness, kindness, benevolence, sincerity. And that tone of voice, vagal tone, we call it, it's because it's stemming from what I was talking about earlier, the vagal nerve regulation.
That's really great. And three great questions that each of you need to write down and
Yeah, write those
ask.
things down.
Write that
Take your
down. You
time.
got to capture that. The next question I have here is
Second
you said
question
some.
they're asking right now. Good, go ahead.
So I'm going to go back to a point that you were talking about, that these upcoming leaders, these good and powerful upcoming leaders,
Yeah.
they're the ones that really understand and protect the biology behind the strategy.
Yes.
That is something that I've never heard any other leader talk about. And what I want to bring
Biology
this up,
behind the strategy is what you're asking, correct?
yeah, so the
Yeah.
question I want to talk about here, because it's not just the biology of the leader, it's the biology of the team that you are serving as the leader.
Yeah.
And so, what are some tips that leaders can do? Obviously, one, to protect their own biology, because that's an investment into all of this. And on top of that, they need to also encourage their team to protect their biology. So, what are some tips that we can leave leaders with to help them with that, especially if they have people on their team that they don't invest in their health, they don't eat right, they don't see themselves as valuable enough to invest in their health, or they're constantly stressed out.
Yeah. Okay, so talking to leaders, you have to explain this really briefly. So the question is, talk to me about the biology behind strategy, you know, and it starts with the nervous system, not psychology. It's physiology. It's bio, the body, energy, body regulation, fats, carbohydrates, protein. High authority is directly related, Tim, to chronic sympathetic activation. You have sympathetic and you have parasympathetic. We'll get into that in a minute. But when a leader operates under constant pressure, which I do, a lot of CEOs do, world leaders do, cortisol rises. Okay, so the amygdala, which is here, is the fight, flight, or free. It's hypervigilant. It's freezing constantly. The prefrontal cortex efficiency level drops. That's the executive decision maker. Impulse control, focus, forethought. Wrote about it in my first book, 30-Second Solutions, on Amazon. Decision making narrows. So, under prolonged stress, the brain shifts from strategic thinking to survival thinking. And that's not weakness, that's wiring. So, the tip here would be to understand sustained leadership requires parasympathetic recovery cycles, not just performance. Parasympathetic is the vagal nerve. It attaches and it gives you calm. We call it vagal regulation. You can Google this. Google this. What is parasympathetic recovery? And that is the ability to control your emotions in high stress environments, because the chronic stress actually could kill you. Why? It attaches to the left ventricle in the heart and it begins to harden you. Thoughts can harden the body, straight up. So when I'm working with executives, I reduce this. They're operating at higher levels. Imagine, maybe some of you haven't thought about this, but imagine living with the fear of having a heart attack at any moment. There are some people that live like that. The doctor says, you better calm down, you better take some time off, you better get a therapist, you got to get this out. We deal with this with pro athletes all the time. The pro athlete is in such a high position of authority and public prominence, they have no outlet. You got to get them into a private room. The worst thing you can do for yourself is to keep things enclosed. It's the worst thing. Yet, it is the most psychologically safe thing the brain tells you to do, because the first sight of talking about this, the amygdala says, don't share anything with anybody. They're going to perceive you as weak, frail, not strong. And that is a lie. And so reach for research from institutions like Stanford, Tim, or University of California, even I think Harvard did something. They show that psychological stress correlates with measurable epigenetic shifts, because you're now epigenetics, you're moving away from the people that are shaping your DNA that need to shape it, and you're attaching yourself with things that raise your dopamine levels quickly. Because the confidant doesn't just play to the ego, he plays to the full optimization of your body, your mind, your business, your organization. And that right there is what true wealth is. It's the optimization of the full man, spirit, soul, and body. And that is the most lucrative, healthy, peaceful, serene life. This strategy isn't just mental anymore, it's molecular.
That's amazing. Well said. Well, in our last few seconds here, any final thoughts you want to leave our audience with?
I'm Ron Kardashian. I endorse this message. Remember, this is why we call it higher. Join my podcast. Make sure to join Executive Coaching newsletter on LinkedIn. This is where you rewire, refire to go higher. No play on words, no sugarcoating, no exaggeration, just real fact to bring you to the highest level of your optimal performance. Tim Boyko, as always, thank you so much for being such a good counterpart.